The Denver Broncos linebacker room got better with the addition of Dre Greenlaw, but there's a competition taking place for the other starting job, and we're going to highlight that and much more on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome to another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You know, it's your team every day for all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. This is the place to be every single day, all year long. So a special shout out to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for tuning in and making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, become one. Hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports.
And I'm Sayre Bedinger, site expert at predominantlyorange.com.
Our training camp position preview series continues with the inside linebacker position here as we focus on the new addition, Dre Greenlaw, and the impact that he's going to bring to the Broncos defense at this position. We'll also look at the guys at this position behind him and Alex Singleton's return from an ACL injury, but can he return to form? We'll highlight that, and we'll take a look at whether or not any of the younger linebackers here for the Broncos can step up and impress during the hot summer days that is training camp in Dove Valley. You get all that on today's episode of the show. Sayre, inside linebacker, I feel like definitely is a position that we are having our eyes on, probably the most defensively. I know we talked about already the cornerback battle at the nickel spot between Jahdae Barron and Jaquan McMillan. But I feel like if there's one position battle that's going to be important here for this Broncos defense, all eyes are going to be on inside linebacker. And really there is one guy right now who's unquestioned to be a starter, and that is Dre Greenlaw, who comes over from the San Francisco 49ers in free agency.
And the Broncos are going to be hoping that they get the pre-injury version of Dre Greenlaw, right? Who only played 2 games last season, suffered the injury in the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs a couple of seasons ago, where he was getting, geeked up to run on the field and just unfortunately suffered kind of a freak accident sort of injury there. But before that, I feel like Dre Greenlaw was establishing himself as one of the top 10 best linebackers in the NFL. Obviously playing next to Fred Warner. They were one of the best duos, if not the best duo at the linebacker position, and they can do a little bit of everything, right? And Dre Greenlaw just has that range. He has the football IQ. He's got the ability to play instinctive at the position. He can play in coverage. He attacks the line of scrimmage. He's tough. So everything that you look for at linebacker. And why did he hit free agency? Well, because of the injuries, right? Because he only played 2 games since that Super Bowl. And I think that's the biggest thing there is, all right, are you getting that pre-injury Dre Greenlaw? But he's obviously, I think defensively, maybe the biggest addition the Broncos made, Cody, because this was the weakest position on the roster in 2024.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there. And obviously Denver is banking on the fact they believe that their investment in Greenlaw is going to pay off with more production at linebacker. I mean, you get a guy who can blitz at a high rate. You get a guy who can drop back and roam the middle of the field and be that extra, coverage protection for you that simply, I don't think the Broncos athletically had a guy that could do it at the rate in which Dre Greenlaw does. And they're hoping that obviously they're going to be getting this guy this upcoming season. Obviously suffered an injury during April workouts, and that held him out of the team's offseason program, but is expected to be a full go here for training camp beginning on July 22nd. And hopefully they can keep him going there, and you can avoid a setback at that position in terms of that injury. But then also you talk about another guy returning from injury, Alex Singleton. While he was present for the team's offseason program, he did individual period for the Broncos, did not do any teamwork during the offseason program, but is expected to be ready to go, I think, day one to begin his first reps, getting team reps, probably alongside Dre Greenlaw, whereas Justin Sternad and Drew Sanders, those are the guys that got all the reps primarily during the offseason program. So for Singleton, he's coming back from an injury, but he's going to have guys right behind him there in Justin Sternad and Drew Sanders.
And then you've got, sort of the unheralded, the guys that are scraping and clawing for roster spots, right? Starting with Lavelle Bailey, who was, I believe, called directly by Sean Payton after the 2024 NFL draft to recruit him to come to Denver. Broncos really like him. And then you've got some other sleeper candidates there at the linebacker position. J.B. Brown, an undrafted free agent in 2025. Actually, All of the other guys are undrafted rookie free agents from the class of 2025. Karene Reed out of Utah, and then Jordan Turner, who was actually a tryout player at one of the Broncos minicamp sessions or OTA sessions, who ended up impressing enough to get signed to the 90-man roster. So I think the biggest distinction between the linebacker position battle, Cody, and the cornerback position battle is that the linebacker one is full of uncertainty. You almost question the level of talent the Broncos have there as compared to corner, where you have a plethora of great options. It's a very different discussion. So at linebacker, the Broncos are really needing these guys to step up and show something that maybe for many of them, they haven't done yet. I guess Justin Sternad is maybe the most proven guy on the team from what we saw last year. So we know what the other veterans can do. We don't know what any of the young guys can do. That's what makes this competition arguably one of the most fascinating.
And I think on paper, you can look at this position group, right? If you factor in the injury history of Dre Greenlaw, you factor in Alex Singleton coming off of a major knee injury, you have to wonder, like, if there's any setbacks, right? Let's say that the top two guys here, Singleton and Greenlaw, let's say they're not in the mix right now. Let's just approach that hypothetical, as much as we would hate to do that. What's the level of confidence in that inside linebacker room? It's relatively unproven, really, outside of Justin Sternad, who's been a veteran guy, special teams ace, got his first real extensive look at starting last year. And you got a young guy in Drew Sanders, who the team wants to eventually bring along to potentially become a starter. I mean, he could be in the picture in the next year or two here for this team. But it's tough to say right now. Like, even with Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton, I think Dre Greenlaw is obviously the most talented of the entire bunch. But if there's an injury here, I truly worry about this position once again in 2025.
I do too. And the warning signs have been there, right? Earlier in the offseason, Dre Greenlaw, it's reported that he's got a torn quad, and then everybody's freaking out like, oh my gosh, he's going to miss time. Thankfully, it wasn't torn. Thankfully, it was only pulled, but still kept him out of OTAs and minicamp. And he also is expected to be ready to go at the start of training camp. I know there was pictures circulating of him out there on the practice field with his helmet on at minicamp and things like that. So maybe he's been progressing better than even the Broncos would have expected. But either way, the injury concern at linebacker is arguably the one factor here that's going to take this unit from being one of the better ones in the NFL. I think it could be, honestly, with Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton at the top, to potentially being disaster again. Like last year, Broncos had Christian Welch, Zach Cunningham, Quan Alexander. You had all these different guys out there playing linebacker for you. And unfortunately, nothing has materialized into a long-term solution for the team. And that's what we're really struggling with right now is there a long-term solution on the roster? Are these just short-term bandages for the team to get by for the time being? That's maybe the one area that sort of puts a cap on the ceiling of excitement for the linebacker spot for Denver right now.
Well, these are a lot of the storylines surrounding this position group going into training camp. But we're going to dive deeper into the actual training camp position battles. Alex Singleton looks like the guy, and obviously as a team captain, there is consideration there, but he's going to have some competition for that starting linebacker spot right next to Dre Greenlaw. We'll highlight what that looks like to tell the tape on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Gametime. And we've all been there, right? Logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. And live music, it should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. And that's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. And prices, they actually drop as it gets closer to showtime. And you can save up to 60% off with their killer last minute deals. And if you're like me, you're tired of endless scrolling trying to find the best deal, that's where Gametime's zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you, and you don't even have to worry about what your seat is going to look like at the venue because you can use their panoramic seat view, so there's no surprises there. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If Alex Singleton can return to form, the Denver Broncos may have themselves the best linebacker duo, at least in the AFC West. We won't say the NFL just yet, but it'll certainly be a lot better than it was last year for what was one of the weakest units on the entire team, and maybe the weakest unit defensively. Cody and I are going to tell you why Alex Singleton returning to form is best case scenario for this team, and what we can expect from some of these younger guys here as they enter this training camp competition. But Broncos Country, thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. We appreciate you so much. If you haven't done so already, hit subscribe. Go check us out on TikTok as well. There's lots of short form content you need on your For You page as the Denver Broncos get back out on the field here in the near future. But let's talk about it. Alex Singleton went down. Well, I guess we can't say he went down, Cody, because the guy played through a torn ACL against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And it was a shocking report to everyone when the Broncos were on their road trip to Virginia or whatever it was.
The Greenbrier.
The Greenbrier. Yeah, the old coach Herman Boone took him out into the woods and told him all about Gettysburg and, all these things. No, but I think that if Singleton is able to come back at full strength, you and I were looking at the numbers, and I think we were both kind of shocked by this, that he had 177 tackles in 2023, and he was easily on pace for 170 again in 2024. The dude is a machine. Is it the best case scenario for him to be back fully healthy for this Denver Broncos linebacker position in 2025?
Yes, 100%. If he and Dre Greenlaw are the two healthy starters at inside linebacker, this Broncos defense is going to be in great shape on that second level of the field in comparison to when Singleton was out. I mean, you mentioned it as well. We were talking about a few days ago when looking at the Broncos defense as a whole. Cody Barton wasn't brought in initially last year to be a starter. He was brought in to compete for a starting job, but primarily be a special teams guy. And it ended up not working out that way as the Broncos are playing kind of chair roulette a little bit with the different linebackers through the first part of the season, through the first 4 or 5 weeks of the regular season. Whereas now it's like, all right, going into it, the idea here is that it will be Alex Singleton, Dre Greenlaw as the two starters if both of those guys are healthy. Though my understanding here is Singleton enters the last year of his deal, is that the Broncos, because he's on the last year of his deal, the Broncos re-signed Justin Sternad to a 1-year deal. You have a young guy in Drew Sanders. These three guys are going to be competing for that job, though I'd say going into it, probably it's not going to be talked about as a position battle. But Alex Singleton isn't just going to have the spot handed to him. That's the business of the NFL, and I think Singleton knows that. The dude is an absolute competitor. He's got tremendous heart. He's tough as nails, and I think that's going to benefit him. Look, a lot of it is up here. The mental side is like when you're coming back from an injury is, okay, physically, you've gone through the rehab. It's just gaining confidence from the mental side of being able to do those physical things once again without limiting, without overthinking how wide you're stepping, things like that, like those little nuances. I can't speak for Singleton where he's at, but from what I've seen from him on social media and just the level of training that he's doing, I think he's going to be just fine. I think he can return to form, but it will be some competition for his spot there with Sternad and obviously Drew Sanders, who is really trying to find his footing now at a solidified position.
If the best case scenario for the Broncos defense is that Alex Singleton comes back fully healthy, returns to form, I wonder if if I'm poking at that ceiling just a little bit and saying, hey, there might be something else beyond here that we haven't quite dug deep enough to find it. Is this hypothetical scenario of Drew Sanders, the 3rd round pick from the 2023 draft, former All-American at Arkansas, somebody the Broncos believe in, that George Payton said earlier this offseason, they believe he can still be a starter. If we dig a little bit deeper past the idea that the best case scenario is that Singleton returns to form, is the hypothetical scenario of Drew Sanders beating Alex Singleton for a starting job, and not just because he's a high draft pick, we want to get him on the field, we're going to play him. Like, him actually going out there, they're exchanging, reps with the first team defense, and the Broncos are like, dang, this guy is so good, we have to keep him on the field. What would you say is better for this team, Cody, in 2025? Is it that Drew goes out and just straight up beats Singleton for a job, or that Singleton returns to peak form?
I would say Singleton returns to peak form, right? Because it kind of feels like it's setting up like we want Drew Sanders to continue to develop. and they've messed with his development a little bit by switching in positions almost every year he's been in the league so far. But the idea would be like, all right, maybe in that situation, they see enough from Drew and they're like, all right, hey, we like where he's at, but Singleton is the proven guy. Worst case scenario, if Singleton, if he struggles, maybe we make a change during the season, which I wouldn't anticipate that being the reality, but more so it's like, all right, Drew Sanders will more than likely be the guy next year next to Dre Greenlaw, as opposed to like, hey, we're going to play it out with Singleton here. We'll move on after this year, more than likely. I mean, I don't know how it's going to go. I mean, hypothetically, we can look at it on paper and see that there's so many different options that the Broncos have here, also including they could even revamp the room next year in the offseason. There's a very distinct possibility of that as well. So that's where I'm kind of stuck. But I think definitely Singleton returning to form is more so what would be in the best interest of the team, while Drew Sanders also takes a step forward in his development. I mean, it's hard because now Denver had a 4-3 defense. Okay, I think it might be a little more manageable. I would like Drew Sanders, Singleton, and Dre Greenlaw in a situation like that, but is that going to happen? No, probably not here in this Broncos defense. We talk about that being a position training camp battle between those three guys there. Part of me is also wondering too, I mean, Sayre, because of the injury history of Dre Greenlaw, because of the recent injury to a guy like Alex Singleton, and even Drew Sanders fits into this category as well, coming off the Achilles from last year. And there could be even some time that it takes to really kind of get fully back from that. How many linebackers do the Broncos carry at this position? Because right now we could talk about Singleton, Greenlaw, Sternad, and Sanders. There's 4. I think they almost have to keep 5 considering the injury history at this position, which means Lavelle Bailey fighting off guys like Karene Reed, J.B. Brown, and Jordan Turner, other undrafted rookie free agents, maybe for that 5th and final spot where these guys, that 4th, and I think that 3rd, 4th, and 5th linebacker essentially would play a lot of special teams.
I that's the dilemma that I found when I'm putting together, projected 53-man rosters, and you try to say, okay, I think that the right idea is to keep 5 linebackers, but does that, where do you pull that other position? Like what position do you pull from, right? Do you keep 5 defensive linemen instead of 6? In which case we're talking about like Jordan Jackson probably not making the team, and he played a pretty substantial role last year. Or do you keep one less safety, from the many that you have to choose from right now? Do you cut a draft pick, like a recent pick, like Audric Estime, and keep only 3 running backs? Or do you cut, somebody else at tight end and say, hey, we can only keep 3? Is it keeping 8 offensive linemen instead of 9? That's the thing that's like, to me, okay, you have to really decide that this linebacker is going to play probably the most special teams of anyone on the team, and he's also got potential to play defense. To me, you've already signed enough guys that only play special teams to say because Justin Sternad can play special teams. Drew Sanders can play special teams. Singleton was initially signed to play special teams. So, we know those guys can do that. Q Robinson was drafted probably initially to play special teams. There's plenty of guys on the team that only play special teams. So if you're keeping Lavelle Bailey or any of these other linebackers, to me, it has to be because that guy could potentially play defense for you in the near future.
100% agree. And obviously, if the Broncos and Sean Payton were high on Lavelle Bailey, they want to see him continue to stack that, which he had an impressive training camp and preseason last year. Got him a spot on the 53, though it was very short-lived. He made the 53, was waived and brought back onto the practice squad. I can't remember for who there, but it was just the roster gymnastics that Denver had to play during the roster cutdown date. So Broncos Country, we want to know your thoughts here on the linebacker competition for Alex Singleton, Justin Sternad, and Drew Sanders for the starting gig right next to Dre Greenlaw. Your thoughts on that? And then who do you think out of Lavelle Bailey, Karene Reed, J.B. Brown, and Jordan Turner will more than likely make up that potential 5th and final linebacker spot there? Make sure you let us know here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. But we're going to go through some of our biggest questions here remaining at this position going into training camp. And a number one factor has to do with, can this group stay healthy? And if they're not healthy, what are the Broncos' contingency plans? We'll look at that much more on today's episode, Locked on Broncos. Health is probably one of the most important questions surrounding the Broncos inside linebacker room going into training camp. And if this room can stay healthy throughout training camp, that's good news for the Broncos and for their defense. But if this is a room that can't stay healthy in 2025, What is the team's contingency plan? We'll look at all the options here on today's episode of the show. Sayre, I feel like this is definitely probably one of the more important questions surrounding inside linebacker. We could talk about health. We've talked about almost every player, their injury history so far on this show here. But let's look a little bit deeper. Let's break it down to another layer of, if this room doesn't stay healthy, what is the Broncos' contingency plan at inside linebacker? I personally don't think it's necessarily on this position group, whereas I think if there is an injury or it's a debilitating injury to one of the key guys here, Sayre, we could see the Broncos play with more of maybe a dime linebacker, right? Maybe JL Skinner or Talanoa Hufanga kind of play a little bit in the middle next to a guy like Dre Greenlaw in the event one of these other guys gets injured or that position is just not performing up to standard. How do you feel about this? Because I know this isn't something that we had in our notes.
No, I think you're right on. I think the idea of getting your best 11 guys out there at all times, and you have some maybe built-in contingencies in order to make that happen with your bigger safeties, guys like JL Skinner, right? And Talanoa Hufanga, who are physical and can play that type of role and keep your that's the thing that last year the Broncos really struggled with at linebacker, was just such an inconsistency at taking angles, making tackles. That's why Brandon Jones led the team in tackles, because too many guys are getting to that third level of the defense. And yeah, he's great at attacking the line of scrimmage. Don't want to take that away from him. He wasn't just dragging guys down as the last line of defense all the time. But at the same time, you need those guys who can attack their gaps, who can play instinctively, who are making tackles for loss. It was only Justin Sternad last year who was really productive in that way with 8 tackles. He was really productive too with 8 tackles for loss. I mean, he made the bigger splash plays out of any of the linebackers Denver had. But the last couple of years, the Broncos have just been way too reactive at the linebacker position, right? They need somebody so desperately to be the next Wesley Woodyard, the next Danny Trevathan, the next Brandon Marshall, the next Todd Davis, those guys who kind of came up from out of nowhere to provide the team with a solution and a long-term solution at that, at an important position. And that's what just, it feels like it's either lacking right now, or those guys aren't getting the opportunities because they're going to, remember a couple of years ago, the Joe Schoberts, and then this last year, Zach Cunningham, Quan Alexander, these veterans who are just retreads at this point. They have to figure out a way to avoid that, Cody. So I like getting creative more so than I like the retreads who are not desirable to any team.
Well, and look, the number one thing you wanted to see is more looks and more reps for a guy like JL Skinner. They talked about him playing the big nickel. Well, he can also play dime linebacker. Talanoa Hufanga could play that dime linebacker role. Jahdae Barron could play the dime linebacker, though. Do you really want Jahdae where he's at playing, kind of an inside linebacker type of alignment? I don't like that. I'd rather, you have a guy like JL Skinner who is physical and was a guy who was an absolute thumper at Boise State, could play the box, I think, relatively well. I think you want to be able to see that because it gives you some size and versatility there defensively. Now, so much I think is also be contingent upon matchup, who you're facing. I'm trying to think right off the top of my head who the most heavy run favorite team will be here for the Broncos this year. I think there's an argument to be made about the Chargers. That's Harbaugh style, especially with Najee Harris and obviously Omarion Hampton added as their 2 backs down there in LA. I'm trying to think of who like the most run dynamic offense you're going to face this upcoming season is going to be. I mean, I feel like Brian Robinson of the Commanders is pretty good. Saquon Barkley. Like against Saquon,
Yeah.
I want as much of a loaded box as possible, and I want to play man coverage against those receivers all day because that's going to be your best bet against a team like the Philadelphia Eagles. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, maybe the contingency plan for this room is, in fact, a different position, different personnel group, though I would say that also might be one of your favorite words there, roster malpractice, because could the Broncos have done more this offseason at inside linebacker? I think Dre Greenlaw's the big splash, but could they have done more? I mean, if you look at the guys that are still available at this point for training camp, there's only maybe 1 or 2 guys, but once again, it falls under that retread category that you were just talking about, and that's not what the Broncos need right now.
Right. And we've seen, like, even last year, the Broncos aren't going to be high enough on the waiver wire to get a desirable guy that gets cut after the preseason. Like, they got Christian Welch last year. And the reason why we say, if anybody takes issue with the statement that we made earlier about Cody Barton wasn't initially signed to be a starter, the proof of that was in week 1 when Christian Welch was playing next to Alex Singleton against the Seattle Seahawks after just being picked up off the waiver wire. So that wasn't the plan, was to have Barton out there. Now, it worked out well for him. He got his money from the Titans, but I think it speaks volumes that the Broncos didn't even try to bring him back that we know of, when they easily could have. They could have said, hey, let's get this guy back in the mix. He was valuable to us last year. And ultimately, that didn't end up being the case. And so, to me, yeah, you don't want to get into the Christian Welch situations. With all due respect to a former Hawkeye, right? You want to get yourself in a position where you believe in somebody enough, like the Broncos believed in Brandon Marshall, Todd Davis, these other guys who were on the team with them in the offseason or picked up off waivers that they felt you can contribute right now. So that's where the roster malpractice will come into play, is if they keep guys around that they don't believe can play, because that was the case last year with Lavelle Bailey. They signed these veteran guys, and when they said so much stuff about Lavelle Bailey. Oh yeah, we loved him at Fresno State. Felt like he had some really good stuff on tape coming out. And I think there was even some starter rumors thrown around, and then he doesn't even play when you have all these injuries piling up and you need a guy to play. And he played well in the preseason. Like you said, he had a good camp. So I just think that's the frustrating thing, is that if you have a plan, if you have a guy, put him in there and get him those opportunities to become something instead of just spinning your wheels. Because if you're going to sign a veteran, go do it now. Go get Juwan Bentley now. Go make a trade for somebody now. Why not sign Isaiah Simmons? The Packers did. Why not sign him? They already have their linebackers set up. Go get a guy like that who's played for Vance Joseph. Cody, that's the stuff that I don't understand, is that if we look back and we're having this conversation in September or October or November, it's going to be ridiculous that the Broncos didn't do something when they had a chance.
Yeah. And I wonder what the line of thinking is from the roster standpoint. Like, are they banking on player development? It's going to work with some positions. It's not always going to work with every player, right? So with that in mind, there is a question that we have here as, could any of these young guys emerge as future core pieces? I think right now the only guy you can look at and say, you have the highest hope for that is a guy like Drew Sanders, who is still very much trying to go back and learn the nuances of the position, has a new position coach. Though I also should mention Todd Davis is a member of the Broncos coaching staff now. So I wonder what kind of feedback he will have in that regard. But I get a question. Is there anybody besides Drew Sanders that is a younger player on this team that could be a core piece down the road?
I think it would be one of these guys that's an unknown, right? Like I said, where's the next Wesley Woodyard? Where's the next Todd Davis? Those guys could be on the roster. We just haven't seen it, right? We haven't seen anything from Karene Reed or JB Brown or, the other guys that are on the team there. Like even Lavelle Bailey, who was exciting in last year's preseason, we haven't seen enough to be able to say definitively that you can be the next one, the next Brandon Marshall, right? Who's Peyton Manning notices the guy in practice making a bunch of plays, and he's like, that guy should be playing for our defense. And then he was the Broncos' best linebacker for a good stretch of time. So it's getting those guys. And shoot, if Todd Davis has to, Cody, he's going to be in his Michael Jordan Washington Wizards era. He's going to be like, screw it, I'm throwing on the pads and I'm going back out there to play. Dang it, you guys suck. No, but I think that's like, he's got to find, ironically, Todd Davis got to be the guy to find the next Todd Davis. That's kind of a fun storyline to maybe monitor.
We'll see how things go here at this position, Broncos country. We want to know, what's your level of confidence in the inside linebacker room right now, considering the injury history? Best case scenario, these guys stay healthy. What does it look like defensively? Worst case scenario, what is the contingency plan? Make sure you share your thoughts with us here on today's episode of the show. Well, Broncos country, that'll wrap up today's inside linebacker training camp preview. Tomorrow's episode, we'll take a deep dive into the Broncos edge rush room and tell you why that room is pretty much set in stone going into training camp and why that's a good thing for this Broncos team. We'll talk about that more on tomorrow's episode of the show.